Hey, and welcome to Journey with Jesus. I'm your host and author, Jonny Singh. This is a platform that's dedicated to your spiritual uplift and encouragement. I'm so excited to share with you today's guest, Matt Cook, who's a friend of mine, and I hope he becomes a friend of yours as well. And he's going to share with us his journey with Jesus. Let's get into the episode. Hey, and welcome to Journey with Jesus. Once again, I'm so grateful that we've got today's guest with us, Matt Cook, and I would love for you to meet him so that ultimately you can get some relatability, some connectivity, and you can see Jesus in his life as much as I have. Hey, Matt.
Hey, Johnny, thanks for having me today.
Absolutely. Go ahead and say hi to the folks. Let them know who is Matt Cook.
Yeah, so I'm Matt. I'm married to Charla for almost 21 years now. I've got two kids, 14-year-old girl, 12-year-old boy. So that's a fun age. I am a professor at Freed-Hardeman University and been here for 11 and a half years, I guess it is now. I also preach for the Stantonville congregation, which is about 30 minutes south of here. A great kind of rural church, but vibrant and growing. And we get lots of students come down. It's a lot of fun. I am proud to be from West Virginia. Johnny, you may not have ever met anybody from West Virginia before. I wear shoes, even if I'm from West Virginia. So that makes me a big West Virginia Mountaineer fan. And I am a proud Pittsburgh. In fact, man, just look. I mean, I drink from my fanhood right here. Pittsburgh Pirates fan, Pittsburgh Steelers fan. Love to watch some sports. In a little golfing phase right now. My son's 12, and he kind of picked golf as his thing, which works out pretty good for dad. If I'm going to pick a sport that I can play with my kid, that one's one that because I'm probably not going to golf much without my family, but my son wants to golf. What am I supposed to do but go golfing with him? It's a pretty good gig.
Yeah, I did a little bit of golfing, and by doing a little bit of golfing, what that means is my adopted grandfather and I, Glenn Wilcutt, he took me out on the golf course one time. He hadn't played for as long as I've been alive, and I had never played before. So we took out his old set of golf clubs, and we took down all the markers that we needed. And we just whacked balls around the golf course, had no idea where we were going, didn't keep track of points until we got to the green. And then it was about 3 hours later and all we did was whack balls around. And then outside of that, I did a little bit of golfing with Top Golf, which is not really golfing; it's just more whacking the balls
It's fun
around.
too. It's fun.
It is. So now you made mention. You said, of course, you're married and you've got two kids. You said you've got a boy and a girl. Wow. Man, I'm married. I don't have any kids as yet. Lord's willing, that'll come in the future. You do not seem very stressed as a dad. I don't know, for some reason, it just seems like a lot of dads that have got young kids seem more tired than anything else. And you're just as vibrant and happy as ever, man.
I'm somehow faking that. I'm just kidding. No, I think, it's funny, Johnny. I'm reading right now. I'm sure you've heard of John Mark Comer and his book, The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry. And it's one of those books that's real trendy. Everybody's talking about it because I teach one of the courses I teach here at Freed-Hardeman is spiritual disciplines. And so that's one of those books that everybody's like, hey, you should read that. I'm a little bit kind of anti, like if everybody's doing it, I'm like, well, I'm not doing it. Kind of like that, it's that personality test that the Enneagram, everybody's talking about the Enneagram. And I'm like, I'm not doing it because everybody's talking. And so I still haven't done it. And I've kind of been that way with Comer's book, but I finally thought I should read this book. Everybody's talking about it as I teach this course. And boy, it's been great. And his kind of thought line is when we are in a constant state of hurry, that is often incompatible with the kingdom values of Jesus. And like so I'm wrestling with that right now and really thinking through like love, joy, peace, patience, wisdom. Like if you're constantly in a hurry, it is really hard to be loving, joyful, peaceful, be seeking wisdom, grateful. So I don't know, maybe it's just that I'm trying right now to not
Yeah,
be in
yeah.
a frazzled hurry because boy, it's hard to look like Jesus when we're just in a constant hurry.
Man, I'll tell you what, that's something that I do not have a problem with. And this is why, this is the only reason why. Cultural conditioning. So I'm from South America, but culturally, like we've talked about, we're Caribbean. And maybe you've heard of Caribbean time before, but it's a whole different time zone, a whole different setup. And when I migrated here, I was labeled for my entire 2 years of my tenuring at the Florida School of Preaching as late. I'm always late. I'm late to class. I'm late to things. And matter of fact, those that have known me in the past, after they've seen how I am now from being married and ministering, they're like, man, that's a whole different turnaround. But there's times even where, I might be preaching in the pulpit and I look at the clock and it looks like time I should be stopping. But I'm like, man, they look comfortable. They're fine. I don't see any closed eyelids. But Caribbean time is a whole different thing, man. Even like on the church buildings back in Guyana, we put a starting time, but we don't put an ending time. So like we'll say we start at, and that doesn't even hold weight. We could put like we start at 9, but realistically we'll start at 9:30 just as long as everybody gets there. And it's just one of those things. We were never really rushed by the clock necessarily, or never had to pay so much attention to it that everything gets governed. There's actually a thing in the Caribbean and it's called to lime, Lime. And all that really translates to is you and a group of friends plan to come together and do absolutely nothing for extended periods of time. So, when I was growing up, I would call up the boys and say, hey, are we going to lime this weekend? Yeah, yeah. And all that means is we'll all meet up at somebody's house whenever they get there, and we'll just hang out just in each other's company, doing nothing, talking about nothing. Sometimes we might play some board games like dominoes or playing cards, but all it did was we just spent time together hanging out. So when I moved here and I saw that everybody was in a rush, a rush, a rush, that was a culture shock. That was a culture shock.
Yeah.
So man, you're on a campus there and you're teaching kids, and I'm sure you run into some that respect the clock, quote unquote, and some that don't realize it's there.
Yeah, I mean, college students are notoriously struggle with showing up on time, but it really is. It's funny. I've got a morning class, and so I didn't mention this a minute ago. We were missionaries in Peru before we came back here to Freed-Hardeman, and so I've got some exposure to like the event. So in a culture class, I teach missions here, and so I teach at 8 o'clock on Monday and Wednesday. I've got a missionary anthropology course, so we talk about culture and time oriented versus event oriented. And it's funny, that particular class is the one Bible class. Every student has to take a Bible class every semester. And the nursing students have kind of a crazy schedule. They've got clinicals, and that's an early morning class, fits their schedule. And it's funny, they are all on time to go to, it's just these nursing students have to be really serious and have all this stuff. And so like they're on time. But then there's some other students in that class that are not nursing majors, and they struggle getting there by 8 o'clock. So you talking about that reminds me of life in Peru. As an American, it was tough for us to like figure that out and adjust to the time. My favorite examples of this, I remember we'd been there for probably a year and a half. We had these Peruvian friends who invited us to a birthday party. It wasn't a kid's party. It was, I don't know if it's a birthday, but a dinner to celebrate somebody's birthday. And they told us we're going to start at 7 o'clock. And I'll never forget me and my wife really struggling with what time do we actually show up? Because as Americans, you tell us 7 o'clock. Well, we're going to show up, birthday party like that, 7:05. Anything later than that is late. But we knew like this Peruvian party was not going to start at 7. So I remember us like planning how late to be. So we said, this is so American, right? We said 7:30. We're going to do 7:30. So we show up at 7:30 and like we knock on the door, they let us in. And like they're still running around getting ready. They're not like dressed for the party. I think another American family showed up a little bit after us. No Peruvian showed up till 8:30. I mean,
Yeah.
they said 7 o'clock, but nobody showed up till 8:30. So for those of us who grew up in a time-oriented culture, boy, it's tricky to figure out what time do you actually mean when you say 7 o'clock. And it turns out for a lot of folks from an event-oriented culture, you don't care. And here's what I think is cool. I think the event-oriented culture and the group orientation, all of that aligns more with biblical values than the American way of we're in a hurry, we're in a rush, and I'm not really concerned about being with people. I'm just concerned about checking that box. And so I love the community-oriented concept that a lot of people in the rest of the world have that I think we miss out on. I think it's what the family of God is all about, right?
Yeah.
It's about,
Yeah.
I mean, it's what fellowship is all about. We're together and we're sharing life together. That word lime or whatever that word you used,
Yeah.
boy, that's a lot like, I don't know, it sounds a lot like the book of Acts, right? Throw in some worship and focus on God and just, we're going to be together. Boy, I think we
Yeah.
miss out on. a lot in our culture.
Yeah, it's really interesting because whenever we do get together in Guyana, and again, it's not unique, but there's other parts of the world that does this. And when you're around Caribbean folk, like you said, there isn't a sense of offense. Offended, nobody gets offended when you turn up quote unquote late, or if you turn up earlier than anticipated. Like, people were running around, they weren't dressed, nobody was odd or awkward about that, I'm sure. And that's usually how it is too in our culture. Usually the folks that turn up quote unquote on time or early, the folks that turn up on time or early in our culture are the ones with little kids, little babies or whatnot. They'll turn up on time so they can be settled in with the kids. And usually that means they put the kids down on a sofa or a bed to fall asleep, and they get to helping who the host is. And they'll run around with the host and get things done and do things and get things organized. But I still struggle with that when I have socializing moments with folks in the US. My wife is ethnically Guyanese, but culturally American. She was born and raised here, but her family are from Guyana. And because of that, she has been conditioned to this time constraint as opposed to my conditioning. And whenever we're hanging out with members in the church, it totally slips my mind that there's a clock. And my wife is looking at me and she's like, all right, we gotta figure something. It's been 4 hours, but I'm just so used to just spending time with people. And I guess the other thing is there was a lot of guys when I was in school, and wrong, no wrong or right, it's just cultural conditioning, really. A lot of guys in school that whenever we would hang out, it felt rush. And the reason it felt rush is because they almost had to get everything in before they needed to leave and get back into their schedule. And it just haven't been conditioned to that. There is that difference there with the clock. And it is really neat that you are exposed to that a little bit. That gives you a good discernment, a good insight into just some things and variations there. Now, you've got kids, you've got a wife, like you've made mention of. Let me know this. Were you raised in a Christian environment, or did you come to Christ at a later point in your life?
Yeah, my dad's a preacher, so I was raised in a preacher's house. That has its own challenges. I was raised in a very rural blue collar area. So sometimes I feel, especially here in the South, where there are Southern gentlemen and everybody's a little more, I don't know, not sophisticated is not the right word. Sometimes I feel like I don't fit in entirely. I'm a little rough around the edges. And sometimes when I feel that way, I'm like, why is it? And then I'm like, oh wait, I grew up in coal mining country. Like the elders at my home church, it was a church of about growing up about 120 members in a tiny little town in the hills of West Virginia. All of my elders were either current or retired coal miners. I think in that church there were probably 12 to 15 men who were coal miners, and so I grew up in that context of just kind of blue collar, say it like it is, and we're not worried about putting on a front. We just are who we are, and yeah, and I miss that sometimes.
Yeah.
I love the honesty that comes with that. I think there's some authenticity. Also, there's sometimes being the rough around the edges, say it like it is, can go too far, right? And so there's advantages and disadvantages. But yeah, I guess you could say I'm a hillbilly at heart.
Yeah.
But I was blessed to grow up in a Christian home. My parents set a great example for me. I do not look back on my childhood as a preacher's kid in a negative way at all.
Yeah. 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 I was raised in a Christian environment too, and my dad was and is a preacher still. And he's been preaching before I was born, so I've only ever known him as a preacher. And you're right, there are some advantages. There's also some disadvantages to that, just in terms of, at least I suppose, like a discerning kind of thing, being trained to view things from one lens versus the kind of lenses that do exist out there. Sometimes we can lack like you said, a little bit of transparency, authenticity, but also maybe some compassion, some consideration. Yeah, when I moved to the US and I moved into, the difference there with the culture, I noticed real quickly, Matt, that I related more to the older folks here than I did to the peers of my own age. And the reason for that is the way they were raised with a simpler life, with things not being, instantly gratifying to you, with, you know, some mutual respect to different people that don't have to quote unquote earn it or demonstrate something to deserve it. And that's how I was raised as well. We we grew up where, not sure, I think you and I talked about a little bit this in the past before, but my parents never had a washing machine or a dryer. We would wash everything by hand and put it out in the line to dry. And, a lot of our food was cooked on stoves that were not electric and sometimes not even gas. They were cooked outside, outdoor. When I moved here and I got to see a little bit of how folks were raised in the 50s and in the 60s and even some of the 70s, there's a lot of relatability there. So very quickly, I could sit and have, drawn out conversation comfortably with folks that are older. And like you said, almost folks that were raised simpler in a simpler life with simple living, as opposed to folks my age. I was just sharing in an episode recently that when I moved here, I had a iPhone 5, and this was in 2019, and I had just bought that in Guyana, and I was very much grateful for what I have because it was a new phone that we just got, and in Guyana, that was a very, very much a newer phone. And when I moved here, the agents at Verizon said, we can't use that on our towers here. And I just couldn't believe it. I was like, I just got this phone. And I had to upgrade to, I think it was like an iPhone 7 or something like that so that I could use it on their towers. But definitely just crossing waters just a few hours away, there's still a transition in time almost. And as my country has gradually grown and progressed into a more modern or Western front. But you're right. There's just something about simple living that makes you somebody that's less concerned with front, less concerned about how you look or how you sound or the kind of image that you bear. Because there's a comedian, for better or worse, I'm not going to say his name, but he mentioned this about his upbringing. And he said there was never a thing in his upbringing that separated black and white because everybody was poor. It was either you were poor or you weren't, but there wasn't a race thing to observe. And that's sort of how it seems sometimes when you're raised in a simpler home with less of the privileges as opposed to others that have been blessed in that way. But it gives you a real neat perspective moving forward and a good, keen observation of things as you move forward as well. But yeah, I almost felt like I wasn't authentic when I had to do some of this transition in because it just didn't feel like me. It didn't feel like how I was conditioned. Real quickly, when I went to in the Florida School of Preaching, we have what's called student days. And in one of the student days, you're expected to dress in a suit and a tie as you go and you minister to different places. And I didn't know that. I had just moved here. I didn't know that. So I grabbed out of the closet the thing that I thought was be the most professional, or at least the more better looking put together. And it was just a pair of slacks and a turtleneck. It was colder here at that point in time, or cold for me. I'm raised in very tropical temperatures. And I got there and everybody else was wearing suit and ties. And I'm like, what's going on here? When I got back from the event, that's when I was told, hey, we got to go get you some suit and some ties or, get you a jacket at least or something just because of the cultural variation. But yeah, man, there's just something about that. West Virginia, I didn't know that. And again, this is just all new to me that coal mining was still a thing up until the point in time when you were raised there.
Yeah, it was up until I was raised, really, and that's been a few years now. A lot of that has slowed down and hurt the economy as it slowed down. But yeah, when I was growing up, it was still, they were starting to shut down. There were some laid off coal miners at church, but it was still a big deal. A lot of my buddies at school, their dad were coal miners. So yeah, still was a thing. Probably not so much today, as near as much. And you hear it in the news sometimes.
Let me ask you this, Matt. Do you think that a lot of your conditioning, how you were raised in the environment you were in, played a role in the kind of Christianity that you get to be a part of today and the Christian that you see yourself as?
Yeah, no doubt. And I think there's a positive and a negative side to that as well, right? So positive is, I think, the authenticity. It wasn't a Southern bless your heart sort of deal. It was you're honest. There's, we're not putting on a show. At the same time, I think a lot of us who grew up in churches of Christ and I think even the church where I serve now, we grew up with a very check the box sort of a mentality. It's like, okay, we got to do this, we got to do this, got to do this. And in my opinion, I think we missed out some on the grace of God. And that wasn't my parents' fault. That wasn't my elders' fault. That was just the culture that we were in. And I think I love that, as my parents will have talked about this too. We thought that we had to be perfect. We thought we had to get it just right, or that God might be angry at us. And so that's one of the things that I think, even though I've come to the South and I am more spiritually mature now, I think I've learned hey, we're nothing without the grace of God, and we will not be perfect. And when we're imperfect, God's not out to get us. And I think sometimes we have this picture of God as this like angry high school principal in the sky, just waiting for us to mess up, right? I've had teachers like that, right? Or just I'm watching, I'm just waiting for you to mess up, and that's not who He is. And I think some people are like, well, the wrath of God. Yeah, of course God will punish sin. But I think scripture teaches He doesn't want to. He wants to save us. He has a desire that everybody come to repentance. And He's patient with us so that everybody will come to repentance. But that's the opposite image sometimes I think that we see. It's that He wants to punish us. And that's not who He is. And so I'm thankful for the grace of God. I think that's one of the things that I've learned over the past probably 15 years is I need to be confident in the grace of God and the blood of Jesus and in my place in Christ. If I'm in Christ, that's a solid place to stand. I don't have to live in fear. Obviously, I want to grow in my relationship with Him. I want to become more and more and more like Jesus Christ. But to sit around in constant fear of the judgment day, that's not who we're called to be. And that means wherever you're at in your Christian journey, whether you feel like you're early on or you're later on, have some confidence in the grace of God as you grow and as you become more like Jesus.
Absolutely. It's making me think of Ephesians chapter 6 from around verse 10 and 11, putting on the full armor of God. And I think it's in about verse 11, Paul says that this power or strength that you can have, he says, stand firm and be strong. I think that strength there, he was saying, is found in Jesus, in the might of His power. So the preposition was showing, you don't or can't be strengthened unless you're in Jesus, one. And then the strength that you do have is not of yourself, but it's in His power. So there's a lot of times where you're right, we almost depend on our own ability to accomplish things, only to short sight the grace that has been given to us. And it's like a little bit of a disservice, right? All of these things has been orchestrated and put in place for us, only for us to say, no, I think I need to be this version so that I'm worthy enough to be in your presence. And I'm glad that you're able to experience some of that. And I'm sure that you have been able to share some of that with your own family and have been able to use that with your own kids as you bring them up in the presence of the Lord. You're a Christian, you're ministering at a congregation, you're teaching at a school, you've got a family. Those things don't happen overnight, right? I'm sure there were transitional points and gradual growing moments for you. Do you ever recall a moment in your life where you had this transitional point of saying, I want to be somebody that not only have Jesus or has Jesus in my heart, but I want to share Him with others? Or was it something that just came from the good graces of others around you? How would you describe that moment of being
Yeah.
a
So when
preacher or a person into preacher?
I'd go all the way back to early high school years. I was given the opportunity to do a Wednesday night devotional, or I remember probably sophomore year of high school, we had little country churches. I said I'm from a little country church. I mean, like, real little country churches back in the sticks who didn't have full-time preachers. And so since my dad was a preacher, we had connections. And so I remember my sophomore year being invited out to one of those little churches to preach on a Sunday night, and do that a couple times. And what I realized by my senior year of high school is God has given me the ability to stand up in front of people without being scared. And I felt like I needed to use that gift somehow for His glory. And so that's really why I went into ministry. It's not because I thought I was a great preacher. It was, I have the ability to stand up in front of people and it doesn't scare me, it doesn't make me nervous. How can I use that to glorify God? So fast forward to my time in college, then I was going to be a preacher, right? That's what I was going to do. And all of a sudden, not all of a sudden, gradually, because of professors and because of friends, it kind of dawned on me, wait, there's a lot of guys that I'm in school with right now who are going to go do good ministry, but there's not a whole lot of people who are willing to leave the Bible Belt or willing to leave what's comfortable to them. And so I became convicted in college that perhaps God can use me in an area outside of where there's a lot of Christians. And so that's ultimately what kind of led us towards the mission field. And then if we get to it, you probably don't know this about me, Jonny. What led me from the mission field back to the States is another story we can get to in a minute. It's more of a story of suffering that led us back. But yeah, I'd say there was a couple high school realizing, okay, God's given me this ability to speak and not be scared publicly, And then in college, it was like, listen, if I don't go, who's going to go? And so that kind of led us to the mission field.
Wow. Yeah. Feel free to go ahead and share some of that. When you transitioned from being in Peru and then you spent a little bit of your tenure there, were any of your kids born while you were there? Or did you already have kids at the time? Were you already married?
Yes.
What was that like?
So that's a funny story. We were leaving for Peru and we found out we were pregnant with our first child 3 weeks before leaving for Peru. My wife is type 1 diabetic since she was 5 years old. So juvenile diabetes, which means it's a high risk pregnancy. So that was a little bit crazy to think, okay, we're about to go to the field. This is a high risk pregnancy. But God worked through all that. So we had been there for nearly 3 years. We found out we're about to have about 2 years, I guess, about to have another child. And that was our son. So after about 3 years, we were back in the States for his birth. Our daughter was a little over 2 years old at that point in time. She had a random doctor's appointment, random test, and they discovered that she had a large tumor on her liver. We're on furlough. All of our stuff's in Peru. Our dog is in Peru. We had just purchased our apartment in Peru. So we're not even renting. Like,
Wow.
we bought our apartment. We're there for the long haul. And the long story short is, I'll never forget the day she was diagnosed, saying to the doctor, we were at Vanderbilt in Nashville. So we we're at a great place. And I said, listen, we live in Peru. What are we supposed to do? And she said, well, you're going to need to stay here for a while. She said, give me 9 months to a year and chemo will shrink this thing. We'll get it out of there and you'll be back to Peru. Fortunately, chemo and those treatments did not work. It did not shrink the tumor. And so in October of that year, 2012, the doctors at Vanderbilt were like, listen, you need to do some research and find out where they can do a liver transplant because that's what your daughter's going to need. And so that's when we knew we can't go back to Peru because of the long term, the major event that's going to occur with this transplant and the long term care. And so it was at that point that we kind of had to give up this dream that we felt God had given us. Man, getting to the mission field was so easy for us. The money came so easily. It wasn't that I was a good fundraiser, but the money came, we got there so easily. We purchased our apartment because our church helped us to get loans from individual Christians. I mean, everything had just the church was growing. Fortunately, we were part of a team. And so the
Yeah.
two other families that were still there just did incredible work. But yeah, we kind of had that dream taken away from us due to an illness. She's at the age now where I can't really publicly talk about this in front of her because that would make her uncomfortable. But I'm going to guess that she's not going to run across this podcast conversation. But yeah, so that's what brought us back is our daughter had cancer and then a liver transplant. And so for about a year, we were in and out of hospitals. And then at the end of that year, we kind of landed here at Freed-Hardeman and with the Stantonville Church and been here ever since, I guess.
Wow.
Yeah.
And that's an interesting setup though. Sometimes people have got the persuasion, Matt, that when you become a Christian, life becomes great. And in some sense, yes, but physically, not necessarily. My mom was diagnosed with cancer in 2011, I believe, and she was getting up to stage 4, and they went through multiple surgeries, and she had to have, certain surgeries that amputate parts of her. And in 2012, she was finally seen as cancer free. And it was very rough for our family at that moment in time. And I remember some of the bigger struggles we dealt with was not necessarily that mom was sick and that we're having to deal with this, but soon realizing that if you don't have the best community of Christian family around you that aren't emotionally or empathetically trained to deal with some things, it becomes very harder. And, just from the way you've described the folks around you, it sounds like you've had a great group of friends and family and Christians around your family when all of that was happening the time it did, because I'm sure there were a lot of things racing through your mind and a lot of desires feeling like they were cut short, but also just being a dad and being a husband and supporting your family through that. So I'm so glad that you had the kind of people around you, and that's what it appeared like. It appears that you had some great people around you through that time.
Yeah, there's just no way to describe what it would have been like. I can't imagine what it would have been like without the family of God, right? They carried us through emotionally when we didn't have the words to pray. After her transplant, she had 4 more surgeries that week. It was Christmas week, 2012.
Wow.
everything that could have gone wrong kind of went wrong. Now, thank God she's doing great. She's 14 years old. But there were times you just didn't know what to pray, right? And so just to know that people across the world literally were praying for our daughter, that helped us. And then the financial piece of it, people, I mean, we were missionaries and we were kind of losing this. Now we're stuck at hospitals. Turns out all that's pretty expensive. And just the financial support that our community, our church community gave us is just indescribable. And
Yeah.
Lonnie, one of the things that happened, one of my favorite moments from all of that, that points to the way that God works in our lives. It was the week that she had her transplant, and then I think it was 3 or 4 more surgeries after the last of those surgeries to kind of fix something. The surgeon, a kind, wonderful man from India, he was kind of telling us, listen, here's what's going on. We're not going to open her up again. We're going to try to see what just let nature take its course. Of course, we believe God had some things to do with it, but he looked at us, and this is a guy who's a transplant surgeon for children. He's been in a consult room with some pretty anxious parents along the way, obviously, many, many times. So at one point after he told us all this, he looked at us and he said, you guys are so calm. Now, at the moment, I didn't feel very calm.
Yeah.
So much going on. But I suppose he was looking at us and he didn't see the anxiety that he saw in some other parents. And I look back now and I think what that was is the promise of Philippians 4, verses 6 and 7, that when we give our anxieties over to God, the peace of God, which surpasses understanding, guards our hearts and minds. And he didn't get it. He didn't understand. I think what that was in that moment, that was peace that I couldn't even describe. I didn't even realize I was experiencing that peace, but I think it was the peace of God that passes understanding, that a guy who was not a Christian, I would assume, is looking at us and saying, what is this peace that they're experiencing? And I would add that I think even the prayers of our church community allowed us to experience that peace. And so it was just a really cool moment to like see somebody else notice, not in a prideful way, like, oh, look how calm we are. We didn't even know. But
Yeah.
I think looking back now, that was God's peace in our lives because of
Absolutely, man. Wow. So now y'all have been able to walk through that. You've been able to go through some low points in your life and still have some high points in your life. And I think it's really interesting that God still found a way to use you in the kingdom in the way that you've got a passion towards. And one of the recent guests I was talking about made mention that if we pursue the passions that we have, God's going to find a way to use that in the kingdom, given that they're in line with his will and not immoral or anything. And you went from being somebody that desired to going into the mission fields and teaching people there to now teaching other people about the mission fields and about connecting with people from different backgrounds and in different places. And I think of Paul a little bit on the island of Malta, that when Paul came in contact with those folks there who were strangers and of a different belief system, and he described the love that he got from them as strange affection. And then you see by the end of some of Paul's letters that he is still in close contact with these folks on the island of Malta, or at least has a great love for them. And there's something about people from different places that just has a way of changing you altogether. And I think you've been able to experience some of that. You desire to be a minister among strangers, and their affection allowed you to minister to other people and how they can show that affection to others. And that's a beautiful thing, man. That's amazing. Matt, are there people in your life that you would say, if you were to name drop some folks that just played a significant role in the kind of Christian that you are today, and you're just absolutely grateful for those people?
yeah, I would go all the way back to growing up. Obviously, my parents were just wonderful examples. I wish I was more like my dad. He's chill and calm and peaceful, doesn't run his mouth. So I wish he's been in ministry a long time. And wow, I mean, he's 70 and he started when he was 26 or 27, started a little late, didn't come right out of college, went to preaching school after a few years in the workforce. He's been with 3 churches over 40 years now,
Wow.
um, which 45 years, which indicates, here's a guy who's not causing trouble, and has learned to live in peace with people. So I want to be more like that. So obviously my parents, my mom's a kind of a worker bee, just always busy, always serving, which is still great for us on Sundays because she always cooks for us and she's such a servant to us. I think back to my like high school Bible class teacher who was a coal miner, right? Not an educated guy, not a Bible degree, nothing like that. But he wasn't a youth minister. We didn't have a big enough church or enough money for a youth minister, but he taught our Wednesday night class I remember from 7th grade all the way till I graduated. No breaks. There was no quarter system. He did it all those years, every Wednesday night. And what an example of like faithful service. And he was real down to earth. He was funny. And so I look back to somebody like that who invested in teenagers. And then I think about, there's many people who have impacted me. I think about my teammates in Peru. They became like family. When you move to another country with some friends, it's family. They're no longer teammates. They're brothers and sisters, like family. And then if I were to say like now, obviously, again, you don't want to like miss out on people, Johnny. That's what's tough about
No.
this. Parents, kids, all the stuff. But there's a guy in my church now. He is a retired preacher. He's 84, has preached for churches all across our region, our county. Eventually kind of did bivocational. He was a school counselor at the high school. So everybody knows him. He preached at all the churches. He's a small of stature, a little white man. I kind of joke, I wouldn't say this to him. He's about as white as they come. And the reason I say that is he's preached for at least 2 or 3 black churches in our area. So there's this
Wow.
little white as they come little man, and like he's respected by everybody regardless of ethnicity. Like he's preached for all the churches across ethnicity, which is just amazing. And he is probably my biggest encouragement. I know of other guys who have former preachers in their audiences, and that's intimidating and can be discouraging because they got ideas about how you could do things better. I would describe Brother Danny Eubanks as my greatest encourager. Every Sunday, he comes to me and says, thank you. And he'll tell me exactly what it was in that sermon that motivated him or encouraged him. So yeah, there's a guy. I wish I could have him around forever. And I know that won't be the case, but boy, what an encouragement. I want to be like
Yeah.
that when I get old, because I have also had, not too often, but the older Christian who just always has something negative to say. I want to be like brother Danny. And I would say to any older Christians listening, man, you got an opportunity to really have a positive impact on those who are younger than you. Please take advantage of that.
Yeah. I'm 24, and a lot of people, when they see me in person, they usually think I'm much older because of how I look and all that good stuff. And I used to tell my wife, I said, I want to be like that older brother in the church that's always got like candy and mint in his pocket and always handing out things to the kids when they run by. And she said, you're already that older man that does that stuff. But man, there's so many good people in our lives that, like you said, we wish we could hold on to them forever, but in some ways we get to carry them in our hearts and in our minds and get to share their stories with other people like right now, so that that can be continued in somebody else's heart and somebody else's mind. I think you were about to say something earlier in connection to just the kind of love that you received from those in the mission field that helped to shape some things when I mentioned Paul. Were you about to say something there?
I don't remember now if I was.
Okay, that's all
Um,
right.
Thought came and went, right?
Let me ask you this, Matt. There's a lot of young people that you're having to be in direct and indirect influence of. And I know you've got to be real intentional about the way you live. And I'm sometimes even a bit more mindful than the average person might get to, go through life being. If there's somebody out there, young or old, and they need somewhat of an encouragement, they want to deepen their journey with Jesus. They want to seek him in a way that they haven't before. They want a relationship with God that they might have overlooked, and you have become an influence to them through this episode. What would you say to somebody out there that's seeking Jesus, that might be doubtful, young or old, and needs Jesus in a way that maybe you have come to know him?
You mentioned a few minutes ago, when you become a follower of Jesus, like problems don't go away. Suffering doesn't go away. And we could talk a long time about the reasons for suffering, and I could give you some great reasons, but at the end of the day, I think the conversation would end with this. Like, if you're hurting, suffering, and struggling with faith, I think the Christian response to that is, okay, I'm going to choose to trust, even when I don't understand it, even when I can't make sense of it. Because, think about it. It was my 2-year-old daughter was diagnosed with cancer. I tried to figure that out. I tried to be like, why is this happening? Why my 2-year-old daughter? Why not me? like, this doesn't seem fair. And then people say theologically inaccurate things like, God gives his toughest battles to his strongest warriors. Oh, really? So God looked at my 2-year-old and said, I think I'll give her cancer because she looks tough. I mean, that's theological garbage. And so you hear stuff like that. But at the end of the day, in the middle of all that suffering and trying to figure out why things happen, for me, it's a matter of saying, okay, if I don't have trust in God, what do I have? I've got nothing left. And so even when I don't understand, even when things are really tough, and even if like I can't read the Bible or I'm struggling to pray, there's this deep, abiding trust that says, God, I don't get it, but I'm going to choose to trust you. And for me, that makes all the difference in the world. It changes everything. It changes the way we face trial. It changes the way we face good things. So yeah, I'm going to say at the end of the day, if whatever you're going through, like, and if you're trying to decide if you want to follow Jesus or not, you're going to face some stuff that won't be great. But there's nothing better than saying, I don't get it, but I'm holding on to Jesus through all of this. And that I think helps you now in the moment, but in the big picture, obviously for eternity.
Yeah. Matt, it's been really neat, and it's hard to try and just crunch somebody's journey and somebody's story down into a few minutes. But I think I've got a pretty neat snapshot of you, and I hope that somebody else, I gotta say screenshot, right? I hope somebody else has got a pretty neat snapshot of you as well as a result of this episode. Is there anything else that you want to say to anybody out there?
Yeah, I would just say if you listen to this and think, oh, wow, he's got it together, I'd just say, nope, I'm a big failure in a lot of ways, but I'm so thankful for the promise of 1 John 1, verse 7, that the blood of Jesus just keep cleansing me as I keep following him and seeking his kingdom. So really, really imperfect guy. I fail every day, but boy, I'm thankful for the grace of God and the blood of Jesus in the middle of all that.
Yes, sir. Matt, how can somebody get in contact with you if they want to learn Jesus through you, maybe the congregation or some way online? If somebody wants to know Jesus through Matt, how can they do that?
Yeah. If you want to hear my sermons, no, this is not a sermon plug, but the Stantonville Church of Christ, we've got a YouTube channel and all my sermons are on there. And if you want to hear some really great a cappella singing, our singing is just awesome. And we've got really cool acoustics and college students come and love to sing. And so if you want to like just some YouTube, we got a Stantonville singing playlist that probably 100 songs on there. You just turn it on. And if you want to hear some great a cappella singing, including some like new songs. If you want to learn new songs, man, that'd be a great place to do that. And if you want to contact me, just email me, mcook@fhu.edu.
All right, man. It's been good. And I'm definitely going to check out the congregation because I'm always in need for some of those songs too. So that's going to be neat. I'm looking forward to having you back and in addition to other people, but we've got so much to talk about and so much that other people would love to hear and get to know more about Jesus through you. It's been a great time talking to you, Matt. I've learned a lot. I've been encouraged by this. I got to see a whole lot of relatability, but also a lot of transparency and authenticity. You're just a guy that's trying to serve Jesus in the way that he deems worthy. And I enjoy seeing Christians like that, and it motivates me. Thank you all for joining us on today's episode with Journey with Jesus. Matt Cook, I'm glad you got to meet him and I got to learn a little bit more about him. I'm looking forward to all the good people that you get to meet through this platform. Until next time, we'll see you then.